Hi, I'm Sam Lloyd, priest in charge of Trinity Church, Boston. Whoever you are and wherever you may be in your spiritual journey, I hope you will find here food for thought and strength for your journey. Welcome. All Saints is one of my favorite days of the entire church year. Today, the hymns are terrific. Today, we'll be baptizing a batch of youngsters later this morning at the 11:15 service. And today, we're pausing to remember those we love who have died. And we're honoring the unbroken stream of saints in the church's long life, people who, by the way they lived and what they did, allowed Christ's light to shine into our world and into our own lives. The famous ones, the St. Francis and Julian of Norwich, Florence Nightingale and Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King and Oscar Romero, but maybe especially all the entirely unsung saints who brought us here today. It would be natural to think that this day is all about spiritual heroics, religious superstars who are able to do the things that most of us can only admire with amazement from afar. But that would be to miss the heart of all saints. For one thing, the word saint in the New Testament refers to anyone who has been baptized and is part of the church. So when St. Paul addresses a letter, he writes to the saints in Ephesus or to the saints in Corinth, meaning his fellow baptized Christians. We who are baptized are already part of Christ's family. We are his saints, his disciples. We are called to let his light shine. So this morning at the peace, when you greet each other, you can greet each other as, hello, St. Fred. Or going down for coffee, greetings, St. Lacey. But All Saints isn't only about these grand individual saints or even the particular more quiet saints. We also celebrate today the communion of saints, the immense family of those who are one in God's love. As we sang in our wonderful opening hymn, "For all are one in thee, for all are thine." All of us belong to God and belong to each other in God's love. We're part of this one communion and fellowship, the living and the dead. We belong to each other, all held together. But you know, it's quite a family we're a part of. Of course, on a day like this, we remember the all-stars of the family, but my guess is that for many of us, it can be faintly discouraging sometimes to celebrate all the great saints who can do nothing but make us feel inadequate about our little saintliness. Albert Schweitzer goes to live in a leper colony. Mother Teresa lives among the poor. Desmond Tutu brings reconciliation to his bitterly divided country. It can feel like we saints are playing in a game where the stakes are so high that we can never succeed. After all, we're just ordinary people. But today I have hope for you. The family of saints of which we are a part is a far more flawed and far more strange group than you maybe have ever imagined. Take our oldest spiritual ancestors from the Old Testament, what we're learning to call the Hebrew Scriptures. Look back to the beginning. These are our earliest forebears. If you've been paying any attention at all to our journey through the Bible here at Trinity, you've noticed that our earliest spiritual ancestors don't give us much to brag about. Just think for a minute about the stories we've been telling. Adam and Eve were given everything they could have to live in a perfect garden for the rest of eternity, but that lasted almost no time at all before they bit the forbidden fruit. They rebelled against God and were thrown out of Eden on their ears. Not so good. Well, how about their sons? Maybe they did better. Well, Cain and Abel came along, and they began hating each other from the beginning, and eventually Cain killed Abel, and both of them had to be gone. Then the human race started deteriorating seriously. And God decided it was time to start again. There had been a botch somewhere in the whole design, and decided to send a flood to clear it all out. Are you proud yet of our ancestors? Well, then we get Abraham and Sarah, the father and mother of our faith, ready to take huge risks in launching out on their own to follow the call God gives to them, to go to a new place, to form a new family that will be part of God's purposes for the whole world. Well, Abraham was great in his courage and faithfulness, but he was also willing to send his wife to marry a threatening king in order to preserve his own skin. Not so good. Over the coming weeks, we will learn about Moses, the great liberator who led the Jews from slavery to freedom, but we'll learn he had his limitations. He was apparently a stutterer. He couldn't give the great speech he wanted to give. He was a micromanager for sure, and he also killed a man early in his life. Clearly, it was his fault. Oh, and what about the greatest leader ever in the life of Israel, King David, the great model of what a king could be, who happened, while being a great king, to be an adulterer, who arranged to have the husband of his mistress killed in battle. It's quite a family we belong to. Many of these were figures of immense courage and faith, but they were also greatly flawed. Somehow that seems to be the material God has to work with. And how about the ancestor we heard about in our first lesson today? Stop by our forum after church if you'd like to hear about a truly unsavory character named Jacob. Spoiler alert here. You will hear about this fellow who was a serial double-crosser, a thief, a liar, and for much of the story is a con man on the run who owes his prosperous life to his conniving mother, Rebekah. Brothers stealing from each other in this family, threatening to kill each other, a distant, befuddled father, a savvy trickster of an uncle who is double-tricked by Jacob. It's said that all families are dysfunctional in some way. This family is dysfunctional in just about every way. It starts to make you wonder, what was God thinking in creating this human family? And what were our forebears thinking about telling these stories again and again? Why on earth does the Bible tell us these unsavory, uninspirational stories when what we want to do is open the Bible and get inspired and pick up, by the way, maybe 10 keys to a happy life? Instead, we get this motley crew of people to be embarrassed about. Well, I think it's because the Bible wants to show us the complex truth of our lives. Not simple tales of good people and bad. It shows us the strengths and shadows of these characters, our forebears. The great Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn once declared that the line dividing good and evil runs through the heart of every one of us. There is no dividing out the good from the bad. And the Bible shows us how jagged that line is in all of us human beings. But the riveting dimension of these stories, and the reason these stories are told again and again, is that a subtle, persistent, creative God is at work with these deeply flawed ancestors of ours to draw the world toward the wholeness and goodness it was meant to be. This God has to be immensely creative, immensely patient, immensely forgiving, working through these relationships and these people to bring our whole world further into the wholeness and peace for which it was made. And so this God calls and challenges and confronts and deals with each one in a different way, which is what these stories tell, trying to bring them amidst the messes they make further into being the whole people in the good world God desires. And so when God called Abraham at 75 years old to head out with Sarah into a new land, God said, "Go from your country and I will make of you a great nation." Abraham went on, faithful as he was. He made major mistakes along the way, but God worked through the twists and turns of his life. Or as we heard today, One night, that scoundrel Jacob was on the run, afraid. His uncle was coming after him. Jacob had connived one time too much and found himself out in the open at night. And all of a sudden, a man comes along, begins wrestling with him by the river. He doesn't know what to do. They wrestle through the night. And out of the wrestling through the night, Jacob becomes aware this isn't just a man. It isn't just a demon. There's something of God in this. And they wrestle till dawn. Details to come in the forum, but they wrestle till dawn. And in the midst of that, Jacob finally receives a blessing. A picture of a crook, a manipulator, one whom God comes and wrestles with till dawn, ready to bless Jacob anew, but requiring him to wrestle and struggle along the way. And God uses Moses and David mightily, shaping the people of Israel as carriers of God's whole world. There's a sense that God will work with anyone, but God will respect us and the messes that we make, and will pick us up where we are and move on. There's an old saying that goes back to an earlier time in the life of the church that goes, God can do just about anything with just about everything. God can take just about anything we will do, and any mess we will make, and we will make them. And God can make something of it. That's the real story we're hearing. For all of the messes our ancestors make, God doesn't give up, working and calling and summoning them. God can do just about anything with just about everything. And a few centuries later, a man came along named Jesus, who seemed pretty strange himself, maybe troubled himself, almost mad, that many people were saying. Well, when he went back to Nazareth to see his family, they were worried that he was out of his mind and somebody needed to go help him. Wouldn't you say the same today if after this service you walked out into Copley Square and a man was out there declaring, "Blessed are the ones who are poor out here. Blessed are those who mourn. And woe to you who are rich, for yours is trouble. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, turn the other cheek, give to everyone." That is not a balanced, wise way to live. And it certainly confused the disciples who spent those 3 years trying to figure out what this was all about. And yet, this man, the complete embodiment of God's love, he and those badly flawed disciples were the ones who launched a movement that created what is by far the largest religious movement the world has ever known or knows now. It's all in the family, I guess. All of us, the good and the bad. So much foolishness, so many flaws, and yet God uses these in ways that brought out courage and vision and moral clarity and faithfulness that they would never have had on their own. Ordinary people, flawed people they were, and yet they became extraordinary saints. Somehow they were open enough for God to get through and use them. Maybe their spirits had been broken enough by loss and mistakes. Maybe they had had enough cracks in their well-constructed lives that God could get into them and fill them with His love and put them to work. What a family. What a crowd of saints, living and dead, that surround us. What a God who wants to redo the world through the likes of us. We saints may be ordinary in our talents, but we can do exceptional things. We may just be open enough to trust that somehow God is at work in this great mess of a country and mess of a world through us. Maybe we can trust that God is at work in people who are willing to try to do something about shots going off in airports and schools. Do something about the fact that every child deserves health care and food and a real education, deserves to have a decent life. who's committed to making some kind of difference in the world, even if next to no one ever notices. We're all part of one family. What a privilege to open our hearts, our lives, our resources, ourselves to be used by God, to be led and loved and forgiven and shown what real life is. After all, God can do just about anything with just about everything.